Well, good morning. So, I hope you're as excited as I am to hear the second conference of the day by Tetsu. Young.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to start my talk by asking you a question. How many of you here, by a show of hands, would like to just wake up one day and know many languages? For some reason, you just don't know. Well, it's kind of how that's kind of my experience. I don't know, it's going to sound arrogant, but I don't really know what it feels like to be a monolingual. Because by the time I knew myself as a living being, I was already speaking a few languages. And that's the way I grew up, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background and what I'm doing to raise my kids in the same ways. All right, so my talk, the title is Pampers to Polyglot. This is a title that my friend, a good friend from my previous company, he came up with this name for my book, and I thought it was beautiful. It's infringing on some trademarks, but I figured if P&G comes after me, that's a good problem. Right? So, Pampers to Polyglot, and how I raise kids to become multilingual. Whoop. So these are my products. Okay. We'll mainly talk about product A, Ronnie. And my daughter will be probably the sequel in next year's talk or something. The agenda for the talk is very simple. I'll talk about myself. I'll give you a little background on the importance of starting early. This is pretty important in the way I raise my kids. I'll give you two concepts that our method is based on, and then give you the data or some results. Maybe you'll hear the PhD in me in the talks. Okay, so a little bit about my background. My father is Taiwanese. He's actually over there, James. My mother is Japanese, and she's right over there. So they met in Hong Kong for some reason. But we moved back to Taiwan pretty early. Before my first birthday, we were already back in Taiwan. So I essentially grew up in Taiwan. I don't speak Cantonese, which is the language spoken in Hong Kong. But growing up in Taiwan, I was sent to an American school. And I had a Taiwanese nanny growing up. And I spent weekends at grandparents. So these 3 points are there for a reason. It's just to give you sort of a preview into the methods I'm going to use. So in my early days, I call them the Taiwan days, I guess, I was exposed to Mandarin through my father, and basically in Taiwan, Mandarin is the official language. Japanese through my mother. Taiwanese is a major dialect spoken in Taiwan. Maybe 75% of the people would know, right, Simon? Hakka is another dialect spoken by people from the middle part of Taiwan, and my father's from that area. And so my grandparents speak that, and English through the elementary school. Then the second stage of my life is I came here to Quebec for high school. I lived with my aunt. She's a Taiwanese person, she's my father's youngest daughter, and she married a Quebecer. So I spent some time learning languages at school also, and I traveled around South America, Europe, and that exposed me to these languages. So French, Spanish, German, Italian, and Portuguese through these second part of the years in my second part of the life. Then after school, so I did a PhD, not in linguistics or anything related to languages, in cellular and molecular biology, actually. I went to do a postdoc, in Japan. And then one of the reasons was to strengthen my Japanese and my Mandarin. I figured if I go over to Asia Pac. That'll allow me to get exposed to that. And finally, I came back last year. In fact, I came back on July 24th, exactly 365 days ago today. So it's like an anniversary for me today. And a few months after that, I started organizing the NAPS. So that's in a nutshell my language history. Very quickly, important is that I was exposed to 5 languages by the age of 6. And then by the age of 20, I was exposed to 5 more languages. Today, I consider myself fluent in these 5 in this order: French, English, Japanese, Mandarin, and Spanish. Now, importance of starting early. So like I said, I was exposed to 5 languages by the time I was 6. And this is something that's critically important that I do for my kids. And I'll break it down into 4 parts. First, 4 advantages, I guess. First is learning multiple languages like a native speaker. Now, this is something I think nobody studying linguistics will dispute. It's something that's very critical in the early days. We think also self-consciousness, self-esteem. This is something that gets set in the early days, so you want to beat that. You want to get there early. People talk about brain benefits, and also I'll talk a little bit about opportunity costs, if you know what that means, this financial term. But I'll start here. I'll take some time in this early stage about learning multiple languages like a native speaker. This is quite important. This has a lot of scientific background. So I'll give you a second to look at this curve. All scientists, investigators in this area talks about the critical period hypothesis, in which children can learn like a native up to and including approximately the age of 7. After that, there's a decline in ability, and by the time you're in your late teens, this capability is gone. After that, it's really a lot of theoretical input, and you have to learn like an adult. Okay, and the person really pushing this is called Dr. Kuhl. She's from Washington University, and she has a very famous TED Talk, which I'll spend just a few minutes here for you guys. I'll let her do the presentation for me.
I want you to take a look at this baby. What you're drawn to are her eyes and the skin you love to touch. But today I'm going to talk to you about something you can't see. What's going on up in that little brain of hers? The modern tools of neuroscience are demonstrating to us that what's going on up there is nothing short of rocket science. And what we're learning is going to shed some light on what the romantic writers and poets describe as the celestial openness of the child's mind. What we see here is a mother in India, and she's speaking Koro, which is a newly discovered language. And she's talking to her baby. What this mother and the 800 people who speak Koro in the world understand that to preserve this language, they need to speak it to the babies. And therein lies a critical puzzle. Why is it that you can't preserve a language by speaking to you and I, to the adults? Well, it's got to do with your brain. What we see here is that language has a critical period for learning. The way to read this slide is to look at your age on the horizontal axis. I've done that. And you'll see on the vertical your skill at acquiring a second language. The babies and children are geniuses until they turn 7, and then there's a systematic decline. After puberty, we fall off the map. No scientists dispute this curve, but laboratories all over the world are trying to figure out why it works this way. Work in my lab is focused on the first critical period in development, and that is the period in which babies try to master which sounds are used in their language. We think by studying how the sounds are learned, we'll have a model for the rest of language, and perhaps for critical periods that may exist in childhood for social, emotional, and cognitive development. So we've been studying the babies using a technique that we're using all over the world in the sounds of all languages. The baby sits on a parent's lap, and we train them to turn their heads when a sound changes, like from ah to e. If they do so at the appropriate time, the black box lights up and a panda bear pounds a drum. A 6-monther adores the task. What have we learned? Well, babies all over the world are what I like to describe as citizens of the world. They can discriminate all the sounds of all languages, no matter what country we're testing and what language we're using.
Very important.
And that's remarkable because you and I can't do that. We're culture-bound listeners. We can discriminate the sounds of our own language, but not those of foreign languages. So the question arises, when do those citizens of the world turn into the language-bound listeners that we are? And the answer? Before their first birthdays. What you see here is performance on that head turn task for babies tested in Tokyo and in the United States, here in Seattle, as they listen to ra and la, sounds important to English but not to Japanese. So at 6 to 8 months, the babies are totally equivalent. 2 months later, something incredible occurs. The babies in the United States are getting a lot better. Babies in Japan are getting a lot worse, but both of those groups of babies are preparing for exactly the language that they're going to learn. So the question is, what's happening during this critical 2-month period? This is the critical period for sound development, but what's going on up there? So there are 2 things going on. The first is that the babies are listening intently to us, and they're taking statistics as they listen to us talk. They're taking statistics. So listen to 2 mothers speaking Motherese, the universal language we use when we talk to kids. First in English and then in Japanese.
I love your big blue eyes. So pretty and nice. うわー、大きな茶色いお目目。そして綺麗な黒い髪。
During the production of speech, when babies listen, what they're doing is taking statistics on the language that they hear. And those distributions grow. And what we've learned is that babies are sensitive to the statistics, and the statistics of Japanese and English are very, very different. English has a lot of R's and L's, the distribution shows, and the distribution of Japanese is totally different, where we see a group of intermediate sounds, which is known as the Japanese R. So babies absorb the statistics of the language, and it changes their brains. It changes them from the citizens of the world to the culture-bound listeners that we are.
Okay, so that's really the gist of it for the way children hear sound. So again, remember this slide where it talks about how if you're used to English and you hear this continuously during your life, well, you'll be very sensitive to the sounds of R and L. You know, turn on the light or turn on the right. If you're driving a car, you say turn on the right. But to a Japanese person, I've actually tested this. I had my Japanese colleagues turn their backs to me and I said, right field, light field. And they can't really hear the difference because their ears are tuned to this, which is larirurero. In Japanese, a larirurero is right between the R and the L. So you'll see them write, like Erika is a Japanese name. They'll write sometimes with an I, with an L, sometimes with an R. They'll write congratulations, like CONGLATR, with the T's, with the L's and the R's mixed up because they can't hear the difference. And Steve has talked about this, I think, recently in one of your videos. And this is critically important because I always thought before my mother talked to me about this, is that your muscles, I always thought your muscles were, you had to be used to pronouncing certain sounds. So I thought that was the reason for people not being able to pronounce very well. But that's actually not the case. It's that you cannot hear it well. So if you can't hear it clearly, the differences, then you can't really reproduce the intricacies. So that's one point. So Patricia Kuhl's, her hypothesis is that, well, given that you get used to this, you get desensitized to this as you grow up. My mother talks about this a lot. Sound frequencies. Every language will have a characteristic sound. It's called the pass bands. So audible sound for humans is from like 100 hertz to about 20,000 hertz. So within this range, Japanese would occupy like the lower end. British English would occupy the higher end. So it's hard for Japanese to hear words pronounced in this area, where it's the stuff pronounced in this area would be difficult for them to really work out. American English is approximately in the middle, but the overlap is very little, so anything here, and vice versa. So if you have Japanese pronunciations here, it would be difficult for people from Great Britain. So all these different languages have different characteristics. If you speak Russian, well, you're lucky. You have a wider range, okay? And the key point to this, however, is that if you're exposed to different languages across this range during your youth, then you could keep this ability, so to speak, to hear clearly, I think. I mean, this is, I was exposed to Japanese and English, and I guess later in life when I learned French and Spanish, I think my pronunciations were helped by this ability to hear. So sort of like you keep your ears open later in life because of this early exposure that allows your ears to stay open and not desensitized. And it helps in accents, like I said. And we can go on a whole different topic on accents, the importance of that. I understand that grammar and fluidity is of course, most important. But if you have accents, that would help in various situations, boosting confidence, social integration, trustworthiness. But again, that's a different topic on its own. So second importance to start early is to input everything before these kids know themselves as a living thing. It's like they're barely human at this age, so to speak. Before they start to talk and everything, they're just living. Everything we teach them and input is just a reality to them. It's not something that they can choose. They don't have that concept of choice, liberty, and all that. So as they grow up, they will, at a certain time, have established self-esteem or self-consciousness. So I picked this little quote from Thomas Szasz. It says, every act of conscious learning requires willingness to suffer injury to one's self-esteem. I think we can all sympathize to this as language learners, how difficult it is to go out and expose ourselves. But kids don't have that problem. They just do. They make their mistakes and just learn, but they don't really know about shame or all that. So early is the best time to do this input. There are a lot of studies on brain benefits, delay of mental disordered setting. Learning in general is better in multilingual, bilingual, etc. I mean, I won't go into details of this, but I think there's a lot of literature on this in this area. And fourth, opportunity cost. It sounds like a big financial topic, but I get a lot of questions from people. Some of the stuff that I'll introduce later, they'll say it costs a lot, or it's very labor intensive. But I think I look at it as an investment in their future. But to understand the notion of opportunity cost, I'll bring up another example that my mother tells me about all the time. She is a teacher in Taiwan, and she would talk about taking a cab to work and taking a bus to work. If it costs you a buck to take the bus, and it takes you an hour and 5 minutes, for example, and it costs you 11 times the cost to take a taxi, but you get there in 5 minutes, what are the advantages and disadvantages? So if you earn, let's say, $50 an hour, then you can get there and do one more hour of work and earn $50 more. Then your opportunity cost would be $40, right? You would spend 10 more bucks here, but you would earn 40 more. That's sort of the notion of opportunity cost. So how you would apply that to kids? Possibly, if you do a lot of intensive efforts to do the different efforts for input, it could cost you more to raise your kids, but it could save you a lot more later in life for them. If they go to school, how much it would cost per hour, for example. There's probably different ways of approaching that, but the idea is the same. I like to do it early, and I think the results are better. And of course, you probably have to do it later also in life, But the considerations are similar in that sense. So it's a way of thinking about how to approach this. Now, before I go into my son and how we raise him, well, actually my daughter also, I would like to introduce two concepts. You're probably familiar with the first one. So, OPO. Anybody know what OPO stands for? Okay. Steve, you what? Yeah, okay. Actually, the first one that comes to mind is one parent, one language. This is the more famous one, but it doesn't apply for us. I mean, that only gives us two options. So we go with one person, one language. It's just a rarer form. Now, what is CLAP? Does anybody know what CLAP stands for? Good, because if you did, you'd be a liar, I think, because I came up with this acronym. It stands for Contextual Language Acquisition Philosophy. I wrote this in my blog about 8 years ago or 9 years ago. And it's something that everybody talks about. Steve talks about it, and Oli talks about it. Luca talks about it. It's basically aligning your life for language learning. Essentially building a context so that they learn naturally, effortlessly, instead of forcing yourself into an artificial context like classrooms, for example. Or you build the context instead in such a way that they are exposed to languages easily. And I'll show you how we do that in our home. So here is, people say he's a guinea pig, but he's not the guinea pig. He's not the guinea pig. I was the guinea pig. I'm just reproducing the results because I know they're positive. Okay, so he's not the guinea pig, and I'm seeing the results reproduced. And this is a picture that I took. We were in Nagasaki in May. I just thought it was a nice picture. It has nothing to do with languages. So this is the core OPO staff at home. So myself and my father, we use Mandarin with our kids. Always Mandarin. Okay. Again, one person, one language. We don't go away from that. We keep it consistent so the children are not confused in that sense. Japanese by my wife Yuko and my mother Emiko, and we have a au pair with us. Where is our au pair? She's probably outside. Andrea from Mexico, so she speaks Spanish to them all the time. Okay, French is taken care of at school, at the daycare. And currently, we're still trying to find a way for natural English input, but we're still doing just TV and DVD at the current time. But we're looking for another exchange student or maybe another au pair who will do the English part. Not because I speak English that I'll switch around. I don't do that. Okay? You have a question now?
How do you have family conversations?
Good. No, that's a valid question. People ask me, but they know you speak Spanish or whatever. That's okay. That is okay. It's a habit that they build. They speak one language with a certain person. It's a habit. It's not because they know that I can speak 5 languages that they're going to switch around. It's a habit. So at home, usually it's a lot of Japanese because of women. Really, Japanese is, I would say, the first language, and then Mandarin, and of course we have introduced this element of Spanish. Sure.
Just about the one person or one parent, one language
Yep.
policy. I haven't read much research on that. Is there a particular reason why that's a best practice in terms of children?
I'll tell you, I'm not a big reader. I don't know a lot about the. I don't know. Maybe I should Google that. I don't.
Require a lot of discipline, and
It does.
I think it's to do with the kids associate the face and the person
That's
with
right.
the language, and that strengthens the
Yeah, and it's building a habit. I think there's another quote that says like something along the lines of success is a habit or something like that. Not something extraordinary. You don't do something extraordinary one day and you get success. It's a habit. You have to keep at it. And you talked about this yesterday, Oli, consistency, right? So we keep this consistency of this association of one language per person. And it can be weird. Like when I first came to Canada, my aunt, like I told you, I lived with my aunt who's Taiwanese. So I know she speaks Mandarin, but she insisted on helping me learn French quickly, and she insisted on talking to me in French. At first, it was weird. It was just weird. But later, it became weird for me to speak Mandarin with her. I have to speak French with her. Every time I see her, I speak French with her, even though it's her second language. So it's this habit. You build it in, and then it sticks. It sticks. All right, I want to hurry up a little bit. So now we'll come into the Ronnie and some of his examples. First one, just to show that he speaks these 5 languages.
Oh, no. 今天是好日子，你要跟大家说什么？
新年快乐！
哎，日本語では？
明けましておめでとう。
what is it in English?
Happy.
Oh, sorry about that. Oh, sorry about that. Maybe I shouldn't.
En français?
Bonne année.
Y en español?
Feliz año nuevo.
¡Yay! ¡Bravo!
Okay. So just to start it off, okay, this was February of this year, Chinese New Year. So spoken in 5 languages. Now, so this is the same timeline for my kids. So he was born in Nagasaki on July 13th, 2012. So he just turned 4, just last 2 weeks. And I always spoke Mandarin. Like I said, consistently, I started Mandarin and my wife in Japanese. We moved to Taiwan in 2014. So this was when he was 19 months. He wasn't speaking quite yet, but he was starting to mumble things. Okay, and we wanted to strengthen his Mandarin through my family and friends in Taiwan. We also sent him to an American daycare in Taiwan. So that allowed the introduction of English at this age. Then we came back, like I said, July 24th of last year. He was 36 months, so 3 years old, and we introduced the next 2 languages, French and Spanish, through these methods. So 1-year-old, 2-year-old, this is a time when they sort of begin to understand some things. They can recognize some requests, lift your leg or go throw this in the trash can, that kind of stuff. They don't really say things, but you know that they're understanding what you're saying. But by the time they're 2 and beyond, they start to have now output. Okay, they understand what you're saying, and they can actually say certain things. So here's 2 examples.
Green.
2 years old. Okay.
Aka.
So this is Japanese.
黄色。
Chinese.
黄色。黄色。
He can barely pronounce it correctly yet, okay? But he's hearing. Now the output, okay?
蓝色。
Oh, not yet.
Black. 哪个 black? Black. Where is black? Black. Orange. Wow. 这个呢 ？Green 啊。Green 是中文。我跟芭比讲什么颜色？绿色。哦，那跟妈咪讲是什么颜色？咦？緑。
Notice I always speak Mandarin, always. Okay, this one is a short one on body parts. Doing the best.
芭比的耳朵在哪里？耳朵。那芭比的 mouth。eyes。对啊，看到鼻。頭。耶。耳。それ目。
Okay. So 2 years, 3 months, that's the time when they, we know that they understand. And they're saying, okay, now that's confirmation. There's output. Output is actually the second part. So this is the development around this age. And, but still, around this age, there's something peculiar that happens that many of you will know. I'll put the example and then I'll let you see what happens here. Okay, he's singing. So what happened here? What was this called? Codeswitching. Codeswitching. Okay. Whoop. Hang on. Hang on. Okay. Sorry about that. So that's called code switching, and many people are worried about that. Okay. So I want. What's bara? It's guava. Okay. And taberu. Okay, so English, Mandarin, and Japanese, all in one sentence. This is called code switching. They don't know that it happens just because these are vocabulary that they have. It's a pool of words. Just use what they have to express what they want. But this clears up. You'll see. Okay, so at this point, they don't know the concept of Japanese, English, whatever. It's just words, right? And people are worried about this a lot. Apparently, I always said "niao niao suru" when I was a kid. So, Steve, niao niao suru. What does that mean? Niao niao suru. As a kid, that's like, I want to go pee-pee, but it's Chinese and Japanese at the same time. So you always have to warn your relatives, when he says something like that. Okay? Yeah, my wife always calls up, the relatives to say, our Japanese relatives to say, when he starts to say things like that, niao niao suru. Niao niao is actually in Mandarin to say pee-pee. Okay, so a little further, 32 months. Here you see that he now knows the differences in languages. So I'm asking in Mandarin, answers in Mandarin. So I'm asking in English, he'll answer in English, okay? So he still can't pronounce very clearly. So Japanese, okay, 10 o'clock. Right? So I ask in Mandarin, he'll respond in Mandarin. I'll ask in Japanese, he'll respond in Japanese. This shows that he now can separate the languages. He now has, an understanding of the concept of this, separating the languages. So he now understands the differences. And like I said, we came back last year, and when we were still in Taiwan, I found an au pair from Mexico, and she came to our home on August 7th. I'll remember this like yesterday, but I'll remember this moment even more. So she came 1 week. If you see that after 1 week, you're pretty encouraged, right? It shows, you're having a good return on your efforts. So he was 37 months old at that time, first time to introduce Spanish, And in 7 days, we see the results. And there's many other different efforts. So CLAP is basically building a context, like I say, in which they can learn languages naturally. So these are all examples, sending them to an American school, American daycare in Taiwan. Here he's doing ice skating, and here's his friend in Quebec, speaking French. We would read to them in Mandarin, if it's me. If it's our au pair, it'll be Spanish. We have books of all these 5 languages. If he goes to Japan, he'll obviously use Japanese all the time. And again, this is a scene in Taiwan at the international school. Other examples, just spending a lot of time with them. Just have different members spend a lot of time with them, and that, by necessity, you use these languages. And let them have fun and naturally have this input. Through family. This is also one thing that we do. We have Skype conversations with our relatives in Taiwan. Like my father calls them up every day, different relatives. Lots of time it's like his sister or his brothers. My father's sisters, brothers, and the kids would be there, during breakfast and talk with them in Mandarin or Japanese. And this is the point where you want to get to. All right. This is 2 months in after our repair came to us, and I'm going to first give you the context. So 2 months in, we're in Canada. So Ronnie's playing hide and seek with our au pair, Angelica. So Yuko was in Japan at that time. So my wife's in Japan, but she's calling in by Skype. So I'm holding the camera. I'm also holding another phone with Skype. So I've got the Spanish and myself Mandarin and Yuko on Skype. And something happens while they're playing. So this is a natural situation. Hang on, I want to put this up. Spanish with Angelica. So Yuko's on the phone. Don't get distracted. Don't get distracted. Suddenly he wants to talk to mommy. The grammar is all over the place. That's fine. I ask him a question, answers it. Right back to Spanish. So in 1 minute, you saw how he just switched. There's a strong association of language to that person, and just very naturally. He doesn't think about it twice. There's no preparation. There's no time to say your sentence in your own language and then translating. It doesn't happen. It's all channeled. Okay? So that's a very important point. The channels are made in the little kid's mind. All right? So this is my last slide. So I'd like to urge all the parents out there to really just give your children the gift of the world, which is languages. And I hope through my examples you can see that you do have what it takes to raise multilingual children, because many people do come to me and say, how do you do it? And there's a lot of lack of confidence. You have what it takes. But even more importantly, you should know that they have what it takes. Even if you're a monolingual, probably not here, but if you're monolingual, don't have that mindset, have that limitation on your kids. Their possibilities are infinite. All right, so that's the end of my talk. If I could feel some questions. Thank you.
Apparently one of the things that happens with children who grow up multilingual or bilingual is that everything is hunky-dory until the school age happens, until grade school happens.
Yep.
And then children universally want to speak like their peers,
Yep.
like their parents.
Absolutely.
And so it's not unusual for children to start to refuse
Yep.
speaking every other language except the school language at home.
Mhm.
Do you have some kind of
I
preparation for that?
Yeah, I am thinking about it and doing some my mental preparations. I guess one mitigation is to input as much as possible, like I said earlier, just during the early days where I could brainwash them. Right? Just cram in as much as possible in the early days so that they keep their ears open, like I said. If they can keep those ears open, then maybe a few years they'll refuse to speak Japanese or Mandarin. Maybe it's not that big of a deal. They can pick it up again later in life, if they want to. I think I saw the hand in the back first.
Yeah. You said when you were growing up, you also got input from your grandparents
Yes.
in the weekends?
Yep.
How much did you learn of that language, only having that input in the weekends?
So it's a good point. I know, well, that was Hakka. That's a dialect in Taiwan. I can understand it, but I can't really speak it. So I guess that's sort of the level. I mean, it's not a dialect requires.
Not talk to your grandparents?
In those days, I did to a certain degree. I still do, but not intensively. So that sort of shows the proportion, I guess.
Right.
Steve?
Yeah, I have a question. First of all, I really appreciate the talk. I'm disappointed you didn't have an extension to that draft beyond age 39.
It's not my graph. We'll talk to Dr. Kuhl.
But my question is, how willing are your children to, how much they get from the DVD and the TV in English, or just in Skype? In other words, to what extent can you substitute a real live person with some other kind of...
That's an excellent question, and this is why I'm trying to look for a live person to speak English to them at home. It's definitely good. I know that their vocabulary is increasing through DVDs, but it's still just maintenance plus a little bit kind of. I don't think it's like exponential. So the effects are there, but definitely not in person. Dr. Kuhl's TED Talk actually deals with that a little bit in the latter half. So if you're interested, you could talk about that. Yeah, I have a question here.
So Ronnie's got to the age when he's going to start writing soon,
Mm-hmm.
and speaking these languages is great. You've done a fantastic job, but are you going to get him to write Japanese, Mandarin, French, English, Spanish as well?
I don't write. With my hands, I cannot write Chinese characters. But I've lived in Japan for 12 years. I've worked professionally, and I write email because I can type. And because I can read, I can type it out, I can sound it out. And I don't really think it's that important, the written part. Maybe if they want to do it as a hobby, that's a different thing. But the writing part is less of a concern for me. And I think that part can be learned later in life if they want to. It's the hearing. I really want to concentrate on the hearing so that they could keep that for the rest of their lives. I think I had Edward first. Yeah.
So you speak Japanese, and I guess your wife speaks Mandarin, so that works. But if you didn't speak Japanese, or if your wife didn't understand Mandarin, do you think there would be a point at which it would get weird for you to be, or one of you to be speaking to a child in a language that the other one didn't understand?
So I gave the example earlier with my aunt. It was her second language, but she used it for a while, and we sort of turned the weirdness into a natural thing. So I think you can do it even if it's your second language, your third language, if you want to. I wouldn't recommend it if you had other choices, like a native speaker to be there, but it's better than nothing.
Right, but I'm saying like if the other parent didn't understand the language that you were speaking.
Well, my wife doesn't understand Mandarin, or she didn't, but now she understands 80% of what I say to my kids. That's that's two birds with one stone. Really? Because it's the same vocabulary over and over and over. I mean, how much can you talk about with a 4-year-old? Really? Ollie?
So I'm going to reflect on your situation. It's a very, very interesting talk. Thank you. It strikes me that you're in a kind of quite a special circumstance because
you have two languages at home, which are obviously, you know, will become their native languages, and then you live in a city and a country where there are two mainstream languages. Correct me if I'm wrong, and then Spanish, which I guess has a big part to play as well. So your natural circumstances have 5 languages that the kids can grow up using authentically. Now, I imagine most people are not in that situation, and you know, nor is it a case of just collecting languages for the sake of it. But thinking about my situation, where we'd have 2 home languages, but I would like there to be more. But living in the UK, any other language that is not spoken at home is going to be, in a way, imposed or artificial in some case. I'm thinking, like, let's say that I wanted to teach my daughter German. I would have to construct this huge reality, this German reality in our lives in order for that to take place. So what advice would you have?
Move to Germany? Come on, you can do it. Well, okay, two answers to that, I guess. Well, first of all, it's true that our situation is different. I acknowledge that. At the same time, not many people want 5 languages for their kids. Usually, families want a second language. And I think it's not too hard to introduce this with the second language, and quite achievable for the third language, I think. So if you want to go to 4th and 5th, then you've got to go that extra mile. You know, you have your Honda with 2 or 3, but you want your Porsche and your Ferrari, then there's that extra effort. Maybe you have to move to Germany. Maybe you can bring in an exchange student from Germany. That'll introduce a situation where they'll use German continuously. It's that consistency. You said it, right? A little bit every day is better than intensive during 2 weeks. All right. I had Sabrina first.
Just a small question related to that. Do you think it would be
How are we doing on time?
problematic or too confusing for children if one person spoke more languages? Because I've heard that in some cases, like, did you guys, let's say in the kitchen they speak French, in the living room they speak English?
I don't like that because I have to think about it. I have to, it's very difficult. Or like Monday is Spanish night, Tuesday is, that's really artificial. And what's going to happen is the kids are going to pick one language that's the easiest for them, and they'll just use it because they're used to talking different languages, and they'll find that. So, all right, I think we're really out of time, but we could talk, outside. Where was the last question from? I don't know. Okay, yes, please.
In Montreal, we have this situation where people switch between English and French
Yes.
all the time. And
Yep.
even as adults, I'm sure we don't even realize it.
Mm.
I get myself in that absolutely every day. Yet, a lot of Québécois were afraid when English was introduced in the early classes that the poor kid brain is going to be so totally confused. So, do you have any of the thoughts to the high and mighties of the Ministry of Education in Quebec?
I don't. My mom always talks about this. In Japan, it's very monolingual Japanese, and they introduced English only like in the middle school, high school. So it's way too late based on our theory, right? And so this kind of stuff is true, but not many people realize or they recognize or they believe in this. Most people believe a second language or third language would confuse the hell out of your kids and it's going to be a burden. And sometimes they go out of their way to speak their second language. In the States, there are immigrants from wherever and they speak English to them with their poor accent and thinking that it's a burden for their kids. But I think they're robbing their kids of a bright future. That's what I think. All right, this is going to be it. Thank you very much.